I recently went to a wedding in Clearwater, Florida. And as happens to me over and over, when you go somewhere, eventually the conversation meanders around to, so, what do you do? I'm a storyteller. What do you do? I tell stories. Really? And that conversation goes on and on for a while, and on occasion, you get someone who'll lean over and say, yeah? Why do you do that? And this is what I tell them. There was once a professor who was much loved by all of his students, except for one young man who sat in the back of the room and shook his head every time the professor opened his mouth. One day, that young man cornered the professor as he was coming out of the classroom and said, look, professor, I gotta ask you one question. Every time I raise my hand in class and ask you a question, you never give me an answer. You just tell me a story. Why do you do that? And the professor looked at the young man and he said, well, if I'm going to answer that question, I'm going to have to tell you a story. And this is the story he told. Truth and story lived right next door to each other in the same village. And they were the best of friends. Now, story, she went through the streets of that village and everybody loved her. They loved to see her coming. They loved to stop and listen to whatever she had to say. Story had lots of friends. Truth, on the other hand, well, Truth went around stark naked. People didn't know what to do. They'd see Truth and they didn't know where to look. Finally, it got to the point when people saw Truth coming, well, they crossed the street, turned their backs, and walked in the other direction. Nobody wanted to be friends with Truth. And Truth, he grew sadder and sadder, until finally one day he went to his best friend, Story, and said, oh, what am I going to do? Nobody wants to talk to me. Well, Story, she looked Truth up and down. And she said, you know what? You need some clothes. Come with me. And Story took Truth upstairs. She opened her closet door and she said, I've got plenty of clothes. I'm sure you'll find something that you can wear. And Truth looked at all the things that were there. He set aside the elegant brocades and the fine velvets. He shook his head at the whimsical and the fripperies. And finally, Truth decided on a pair of black pants and a black shirt. Just before he left, he reached out and he grabbed himself a bright red feather boa. And Truth went down the stairs and out into the streets. And Truth found that people wanted to talk to him. They would come up. They would say, how do you do? They would listen to what he had to say. And after a while, Truth had almost as many friends as Story. Now, when the professor had finished telling that story to the young man, he said, I'm the same way. I give you the answer. I just dress it up a little. Because after all, no one wants the naked truth. And that is the story.